Alex, it is lovely to see you. How are you today?
Great, Maria, thank you. And yeah, I'm just glad to be here again. And we're just talking about how things have changed so quickly. It's been quite a journey recently, hasn't it?
It has, it has. I remember when I first met you, I'm trying to think now, it must have been about 2 or 3 years ago. And when I found you online, and I thought, this young man has something special. But let's show people what you have that's special. Let's talk about you today. Let's start with, what's been a real challenge for you. How have you navigated professional speaking with a stammer?
I guess it's interesting, and it's not your typical career path for somebody who's stammered ever since they've been able to speak. I mean, to give a bit of context, the stammer comes and goes when it likes, and I struggle with certain words. I find ways of getting around them, but you can't forget your own name. And for example, I struggle with words beginning with C or K, which isn't ideal when you're from Kelsall and now live in Kendal. And I guess for so long it was a gripe, I was a victim to the stammer. But I've always found, or I found by chance, that actually speaking to an audience, speaking to a room full of 500 people was actually so much easier than a one-to-one conversation or speaking on the phone. I mean, I've always avoided phone calls like the plague. And from a young age, I was smashing up phones at home with the frustration of being unable to say my own name. And I think it was by chance when I got invited to go and speak at my old school, one of my very first talks, when I was about 15 or 16, that I confronted that fear and realized actually what I could do. And it makes no logical sense, but actually what I've done since then and what I still do to this day is just, the stammer is part of me. It's part of the story. I use it to my advantage. And I think as a speaker on adversity and overcoming challenges, that's what I do. I just show up authentically as I am, and I don't hide the stammer. When I do it, if I'm not comfortably, expressing myself or trying to hide something, trying to be perfect, the stammer kind of knows, and it comes out of the woodwork in dramatic fashion. And people relate to that. People need to see other humans that have the same doubts and concerns and fears that they have, because they connect with that. And so, although my stammer has improved a lot over the last few years, I can still go and speak to 500 people, and then on the train home, I can't ask for a train ticket. And in the introductions, I'll always be that kind of nervous person who kind of sits in a corner trying not to speak to people. But I think the biggest challenge is probably the sales process, because if people aren't aware of the stammer, people haven't read my bio, my site, if they want to get on a phone call, they probably hear the stammer. And if you're not aware of that, you may hear somebody that's very nervous, very anxious, and you may have concerns about booking them to come and speak to your team. And it's a shame that people could miss out on the opportunity just because they're not aware. But 99% of people are very understanding, and actually that's what they want. But I think what I've had to do around that is I often get my assistant to make phone calls for me, just to get past that initial hurdle. And then when I feel comfortable, the stammer is an advantage. Not a lot of speakers have a stammer, so I can't get rid of it. So I just have to embrace it.
Fantastic. Absolutely. And I know your assistant, she's incredibly efficient. So it's good to get her to make the phone calls for you. So that's great.
She's much better than me. Yeah, she's fantastic.
No, don't say that. Don't say that. So the other thing, of course, is the challenge of being quite a young speaker in an established market with a lot of older speakers who are much more experienced and maybe have done a bit more because they're older. So how have you dealt with that challenge?
I guess so, because I mean, with this, with speaking, being fairly young, I'm 26, which I guess is quite unusual when you look at most motivation speakers on the circuit are in their 40s or 50s. And it's really important not to compare myself, because I may want to be as successful and as booked and charging as much as they are, but some of them have been doing this longer than I've been born. And I've never really seen age as a barrier. For me, again, I have to use it as an advantage, because in some ways I'm different, and it stands me apart. And for a while, I think I started to make the mistake of trying to match what other people were doing. I was trying to be too corporate and not really doing what I've always done, which is that kind of authentic, human, vulnerable side to adventure. But then it never felt quite right. And I think that's when I realized that, I'm not from a business background, and that's why I'm booked, because they want a different perspective, because different perspectives give a different way of thinking. And so I've made that mistake, and I've just had to go back to the the raw essence of what I started doing and what I still do and what I'm best at, which is just giving my story, giving my perspectives. So the biggest challenge of it is simply just being taken seriously. Who am I to come and speak to people who've been in business for 20 years and CEOs and, C-suite teams that have far more experience of life than I do? But that's not to say that I have not had experiences and insights that they can use. So I think it's just trusting myself, trusting the value that I can bring, and ultimately staying in my own lane, really, and trying not to fit in the crowd. I think when I get to 30, when I get older, I'll start to blend in a lot more. So it'll be even harder to sort of find that sweet spot, really.
That's really interesting, because what attracted me to you originally when I was running my bureau was the fact that you were young, because I think we need more younger voices. So which is another reason why I wanted you to be on this podcast, because I want you to inspire and encourage other young people to become speakers and to share and to realize that there is a space for them. Absolutely. On the stages. Sure
there is. And again, there's not that many of us. And I think again, although I often have that imposter syndrome of, who am I to be talking to these people about life and overcoming challenges? When you look about 12, it certainly has an advantage, and I'm trying to keep that as long as I can. But I think also I remember speaking for a team of senior managers that was a manufacturing company about 3 or 4 years ago, and that morning they kind of kept me as a bit of a surprise element to this. It was part of a leadership training program, and I was the first speaker on the second day. And I remember after my keynote, I spoke for around 45 minutes. In the Q&A, the first thing they said was, "I saw this young guy in a suit and thought you were there to fix the projector, and then you just blew us away."
I love that.
And
I love that.
Yeah,
could you fix the projector though if it had gone wrong?
I'm quite tech savvy. It must be a millennial thing, but luckily the projector worked just fine.
Fantastic. So, I mean, you've been speaking now for a little while, so you've obviously seen some speakers, and there will be speakers that inspire you. Who inspires you in the speaking world?
Oh, there's so many, and I'm going to name drop quite a few here. I can't name just one. I think we're lucky that at least my experience so far in motivation speakers, in the motivational speaking circuit, is that everybody's incredibly generous and supportive. They all know that we've all had to start somewhere. They've been where I am many years ago. And so far, I've not met anybody that hasn't been, generous and true to their brand and trying to share what they've learned. And I've been very lucky for that. It's a wonderful community where everybody helps each other out, and I really hope that in time to come, I can be that same person sharing the things that I've been given. But I think a few of the names that I follow, I think, firstly, I think yourself, Maria, you're a huge authority in the speaking world and give and share so much. And I've always, there's so much of my journey now is thanks to your help and guidance. So first and foremost, for giving me that chance. I think another big name in the speaking world is Jamil Qureshi. He's so successful as a speaker. I think we know he's one of the most booked on the circuit in the UK. And watching his journey on LinkedIn alone, you can see just how it's possible to build such a successful speaking business again, I don't think it was the journey that he ever really planned to go down. And I think it just shows how big a speaking business can get. But despite his success, he still gives so much and is still so authentic and true to himself. And he hasn't lost that sense of who he is and just being true to himself. And his LinkedIn polls are also hilarious, which makes LinkedIn so much more enjoyable. So Jamil is a big inspiration. Penny Mallory, again, I met Penny a couple of years ago, and we were both kind of trying to work out, how do we respond to COVID and the pandemic? And in that time, I've seen her speaking career just skyrocket. And again, it's a great example of how successful you can be when you really put the work and the time in. And again, still supporting and giving time to others. I should mention Casper Craven as well. I think because people often say to me, and some of the feedback I often get when I'm speaking to managers and leaders, is the sense of, well, yeah, I'd love to go off and climb Everest and do this adventure and do that, but I've got a wife and kids and a business to run and bills to pay, and that's a perfectly valid reason. I feel fortunate that I don't have those commitments, but equally, Casper, he cleverly combined that together, and he sailed an ocean with his young family, and now talks about that and the lessons that he learned, which I think for somebody like that is a great example to others to show that actually, it is possible to combine these things when they're struggling with all the commitments. I think I should also mention Deborah Searle as well. I was on Deborah's podcast in the very early stages of my speaking career, and I remember after the interview, she stayed on the line and just gave me so much advice that absolutely changed the direction of my speaking career. And again, such a down-to-earth but fiercely inspirational person. So we're lucky that we have so many of these names that give so much.
You've named some of my favorite speakers there, so thank you for doing that.
I wonder why.
That's wonderful, fantastic. So your area of expertise is, you've mentioned it already, is resilience, overcoming adversity, well-being. What do those mean to you?
It's a really good question, and it's challenging because I've had to spend a lot of time getting to know these myself, because if you can't concisely describe it, then you don't know it well enough, as they say. And for me, I speak on resilience through adventure, putting my adventure experiences, my challenges, my expeditions into a day-to-day context. When you're on the mountains, when you're on an expedition, when you're stuck in an avalanche, you've put yourself voluntarily into a difficult situation. On a day-to-day basis, we're surrounded by challenges that we didn't choose, such as the pandemic, where we had no training, we couldn't prepare for it. We've got to respond on the job. And that's why I think adventure takes you out of that comfort zone, puts you into these situations where you learn and you grow so much. But for me, I think resilience is a process. It's our ability to cope with a difficult situation or adversity, and ideally to grow from it, to actually move forwards as well. I think it's so much more than just bouncing back, because in the last 2 years alone, the world has changed more than we could ever have imagined. So do we really want to bounce back? Really, we need to move forwards. So I think resilience to me is something that it's not something we have, but it's something that we do. It's about the actions, it's about the processes, and it's about the habits that build behaviors. So that was how I define resilience, and when I'm speaking, especially on Zoom, I often do a poll where I ask people how they define resilience, and you get such a broad spread, and that's why it's important just to get people on the same page. But I think ultimately resilience is our ability to overcome challenges. If we can do that, then obviously we can achieve more, we can cope with setbacks, we can cope with the pandemic, and ultimately for a business we can perform better. Well-being is essentially a state. It's a feeling of being happy, content, healthy and comfortable. But again, because it's a state, it's not constant. It's always changing, and we all have those really bad days, like when the car breaks down or something happens in the family. We've all been there. And it's really important to say that I'm not saying that mental ill health is caused by a lack of resilience, because it's far from it. And the last thing we need is more stigma based on mental health, because I've been there and openly talk about that. But well-being and resilience for me are intrinsically linked, because I think you can't improve one without improving the other. A lot of the protective factors for resilience are the same in well-being. If you're physically healthy, then you're going to reduce stress, you're going to be less prone to anxiety and depression, and equally you're going to be better able to cope with challenges and setbacks at work or on a mountain somewhere in Everest. So for me, they are separate, but I see them as part of the same toolkit. If you look after your physical or mental well-being, you're more resilient to challenges. If you're more resilient, you're less likely to resort to alcohol or junk food when you've had a bad day. You're more likely to go and do some mindfulness or go on a run. And it's trying to find the sweet spot between them, I think.
Maybe, can I do both? Is that okay? Can I have the junk food if I've done the exercise? Is that all right?
I'm an ultra runner, so that's how we work. It's all about the food. But I think as well, I said resilience is not a fixed state. Even though I speak on resilience and I've overcome, big challenges and ultra challenges and endurance, doesn't mean I don't have the days when I just give up and go and lie on the sofa and do nothing. And equally, that's part of well-being as well. So I think it is fascinating, and I'm always reading and trying to learn more about resilience because everybody defines it differently. But I really think that I take an approach to resilience where actually it's about building the tools, building those habits, building those behaviors, and that's how we improve our well-being at the same time.
Okay. I mean, another area you talk about, which is really closely related to well-being and resilience, is beating burnout.
Yeah.
Can you give us any tips on that? Because I think some speakers will be finding that they might be feeling a bit burnt out, especially if they've been doing a lot of events, virtual events, and now suddenly to go and travel again and be busy. I think some of us have. In fact, I wouldn't mind a tip as well, because I think I almost burnt out over the COVID period.
Yeah, well, I'll give you 3 if that's okay.
Yes, please.
I think it's interesting as you say there. I think we've all experienced some form of burnout in the last 2 years. I don't think many people have escaped it. I speak a lot in healthcare and the NHS, and they're really prone to it because they often, tend to care for others before themselves, and there's lots of other factors at play there. And ironically, I mean, even last summer, it really got me because I spoke on a Friday to, I think it was a veterinary event around well-being and resilience. I ran a 70-mile ultra marathon the next day, and the week later, I just completely hit the wall. So nobody's immune to it. But I think burnout is that sense of overwhelm. As you say, everything suddenly opened up very quickly. We've gone from being sat in front of a Zoom screen to traveling again, and you realize how tiring that is. And lockdown and the pandemic has blurred those boundaries. For some of us like me, my office is also now my living room where I eat everything. There's no separation. And it's like an ultra marathon as well. Burnout can be very, very insidious. It just creeps in and then it hits you. And I read a study by Forbes recently that I think nearly 70% of people working from home are showing signs of burnout. Nearly 70%. So clearly it's a big problem. And again, like an ultra marathon, I remember on my 3 Peaks challenge run about 2 years ago, I set off at 3:30 in the morning. I was cock a hoop. I was running, bat out of hell. And then a few hours later, I fell asleep in a bus stop. And that's what burnout is for me. It just creeps in. So the 3 tips that I've learned and that I'm still trying to practice, I think, number 1 is setting boundaries. You have to create those for yourself, otherwise people will set them for you. And that can be something as simple as setting a consistent routine. So this year, 11 p.m, I turn my laptop off. That may still sound quite late, but that's a big improvement to what it used to be. 11 p.m, no matter what I'm doing, the laptop's off. That's maybe gets me a little bit more sleep. That's going to improve my resilience and well-being. I think secondly, it's to pause before we commit. Now, this is probably why salespeople try and get us on the phone. And another reason why I probably avoid phone calls is it's very easy to say yes when you're in front of somebody. But I will always try to say, I'll check my diary, let me come back to you on that. I'm not sure. Because when you've got time to reflect, you can actually assess, is this a priority? Have I got time for this? Do I really want to do it? Otherwise, if you're on the phone, you can end up coming off the phone thinking, oh, bugger, how am I going to find the time to do that? So I think pause before you commit is number 1. And I think number 3 is, I'll probably end up giving you 4 here as well, but there's a really good book by Brian Tracy called Eat the Frog, and he has loads of tips around time management. But I think another one of those is to don't do more today than you can recover from by tomorrow. And it's easy just to do one more thing and one more thing to catch up, but you never ever get ahead of those small things. So I think really it's about knowing when to stop, when to take a step back in order to step forwards, because when you're burnt out, you're no use to anybody really. And I think that's just a few things for me is boundaries is absolutely paramount.
Fantastic. I've written those down because I think they're really good. That pause before you commit, Do you know, that's one that I need to do, because I say I'm not very good at saying no, and I always say yes, and then I have to go back and say, you know, I said yes, I don't think I can do it, which is really bad, really, isn't it? It's better to say no and
Yeah,
not,
yeah.
yeah. So I've got to do that. I'm not good at pausing. It's an Italian thing. I have to, react. So I need to learn that. The routine thing's a good one. 11 o'clock is a bit late,
It's an
and
improvement.
it's true. And Brian Tracy is that recover. Yeah, don't do more than what you can recover from. That is such a good tip, because it's true. Sometimes I'll do a really, really long day, and then the next day I'm useless. So it's such a good point. Thank you for that. Brilliant. What's the best advice you've ever received?
Again, I've been very lucky to have a lot of great mentors and coaches and people that have taken me under their wing. And again, I hope that one day I can be the same person to do that. If I'm going to focus on my speaking business, I think probably the best advice I've had, and I know you've given me lots of nuggets, Maria, is probably that shy bairns get nouts, which translates to shy kids get no sweets. And what I've noticed in the last 6 months, especially, is I've had the confidence to be more proactive rather than reactive, and going out, speaking to people, having more conversations, and my speaking has just taken off. And I've never had the confidence to do that until recently. So I think it's just having the confidence to speak to people, to ask for help, and I'm loving the process. I've kind of gone back to Everest mode, as I call it, because when I was fundraising for Everest in 2014, I mean, I was 18. I had to raise 35k from corporate sponsorship in 18 months. I was washing dishes in my local pub. My parents weren't going to sign me a check. I had to find a way or make one. And I had to knock on every single door I could. And, I was responsible for my own success or failure. And I guess I'm going back into Everest mode. I'm knocking on doors and speaking to people, because I think my experiences, my adventures can help people. So that shy Ben gets no sweets from my mentor, Chris, is something I still live by when I'm on, when I'm on the wall, when I'm on the fence, just do it, and me and Chris have now started a charity together. So that process has taken us a very long way.
Fantastic. And not many 26-year-olds can say that they have a charity. In fact, you started it several years ago. So you were very young when you started your charity. So that was brilliant. Congratulations on that. Let's share with us the charity, please, in case anybody wants to contribute.
Yeah, so it's called Mind Over Mountains, which is a mental health charity. We actually started it. We started it in 2019, but it's became a charity during lockdown of all times. And basically, for me, from a young age, the outdoors adventure has been my way of fighting back, climbing above my own adversity, anxiety, depression, stammering, bullying, epilepsy. And the outdoors gave me that tool, it gave me that purpose, that coping mechanism. And as a charity now, we are about trying to create those same experiences for people, trying to build resilience, to reconnect in nature by combining hill walking with coaching, inspirational speakers, mindfulness and counseling, and just giving people that safe space to walk and talk. But the real catalyst for that was actually in 2017. I cycled, ran and walked to the highest points of all 100 counties in the UK. And what struck me from that journey was it took me longer to get an appointment for my depression and my eating disorder than it did to cycle 5,000 miles around the UK.
Wow.
So Mind Over Mountains kind of was the catalyst from that. And now we're a national charity, working with the NHS, working with all walks of life, because we believe that everybody should have access to the tools that they need to stay healthy. And now I run the charity alongside the speaking business as well. So it's, been pretty busy.
That's incredible. That's a terrible thing that you could do that journey, that adventure, and it took you less time than trying to get an appointment. That's sad. And we're not criticizing the NHS at all, because they are overworked. We should be giving them more funding and more support, shouldn't we, really? And I love that Everest mode. That's great. So stay in Everest mode. I always encourage speakers to be proactive. So I love the fact that you are in Everest mode. So that's great. So, we've mentioned the pandemic a few times. How has your speaking business changed during the pandemic?
It's like many of us, I think it forces us to stop, to think, to reflect on what matters and what doesn't. And I think for some people that was a difficult process, but for me, I was actually very grateful for that, because overcoming challenges is what I do. I look for the opportunities straight away. All my bookings disappeared, like I think like we all did that summer. And it was something we'd never trained for, but instantly I just thought, right, what can I do to make the best of the situation? I didn't get any bookings until the autumn, but it was time to adapt, to take stock and refocus. I mean, I wouldn't be living true to myself if I didn't trust the process of actually how can I find the opportunity in this and take advantage. I think initially all of us were kind of thinking this was going to be a temporary thing. I kind of winged it for a while. I remember Maria, our first podcast, I didn't even have a proper camera then, I didn't have a microphone. I had the lockdown haircut. And then I think a lot of speakers just said they were going to wait. And I was confident that things were going to be okay. But obviously this thing went on a lot longer than we expected. And then businesses started to say, actually, we have to carry on because we need our teams to keep performing. We need to look after their well-being. So resilience and well-being became the hot topic because suddenly everybody's burnt out and scared and anxious. And being stuck on Everest in an avalanche, in an earthquake zone, teaches you a lot about staying resilient in uncertain situations. So we were all stuck in our own base camp. We were all stuck behind four walls for so long. So actually, it gave the perfect opportunity to share what I know. And it took me a while to adapt, to sort of take it seriously. But, I think now 2021 became my best year ever. And I do still recall actually at the end of 2020, when I got a booking, I was so grateful that virtual technology was allowing us to keep working. There was no furlough. I'm self-employed, so it was down to me to find a way out of this. And ultimately, I was just so grateful to get a booking. But a year later, my fees have probably gone 4 or 5 times higher than that, and I wouldn't accept a booking for that fee now. So it's quite staggering when you stop and look at how far that's changed. And actually now, speaking virtually, I feel doesn't really offer any less value if it offers more value to teams, because it's still the same journey to get to that point, the same content that you're delivering. And then there's the whole logistics around not traveling, not spending money on that. There's recordings, there's wider reach. And actually, I've loved the process. And as I say, last year was my busiest ever. This year already is looking really positive, and I think I'm probably going to beat last year again. Don't get me wrong, I think we all miss that human connection, being in a room. You feel like a bit of an imposter sat here sometimes, on Zoom like a YouTuber, and you don't get any response or feedback because you've got 400 people in the room and yet you can't see them. So it's had its challenges, don't get me wrong. I think we've all had to adapt, but I'm just grateful that we've had these opportunities. And I'd say about 50% of my work now is still virtual. But yeah, really, really excited to see what happens for the rest of this year. But it's off to a great start. And I think looking at the way the fees have gone, the way that people have got the confidence back, it's been a terrible, terrible time for so many people, but I'm very grateful for everything it's given me.
And you've worked really hard. You've worked really hard on your speaking business. You've taken time, as you said, you stepped back, you looked at it, you worked on yourself, on your speech, on your content, on your positioning, everything. You've really, I've seen you transform, and it's no wonder your fees have gone up. And I think they're going to continue to go up, Alex. I think you have a really fantastic career ahead of you. So I'm thrilled. So now here's a question for you, and I'm sure people will be curious to know, what's your next challenge?
What's next? I think last year, my challenge is always just trying to keep on going as I was, keep building the business and manage the charity and manage speaking and books and things without burning myself out was the challenge. I think now I'm planning my biggest challenge ever this summer, and I'm still scoping it out. I'm going to be that annoying person who just kind of gives you a teaser, but it's going to be a very long run. It's going to be based in the UK and hopefully breaking a record, and trying to raise £50,000 for Mind of the Mountains, because there are so many people now falling through the gaps in the mental health system, as you say, no fault of the NHS. We've just been swamped with demand. And I think the outdoors can change lives and save lives. It certainly saved mine. So this journey, one mountain at a time, maybe there's a hint, is going to hopefully take people on that journey and bring people back together. And the thing is, with resilience, it's like a muscle. You've got to keep pushing the bar. And I'm now really curious to see what I can do next and how far I can go. So that's going to be over the summer. I'm going to be announcing it fairly soon. So if people keep connected with me on LinkedIn and my newsletter, then they can get the exclusive updates of that. In the meantime, I've got my first 100-mile run in about a month's time in the Lake District here. So that's given me something to focus on. And I think just trust the process. I think now I've said it, now I've put it out there, no doubt that the cosmos will send some kind of setback to try and knock me off. But that's what I do best. And I'm just grateful, like we all are, that we can plan ahead, to have inquiries coming in again like this, and to see the difference, to not be grasping, to actually be turning things down, is wonderful. So yeah, bring it on really, and hopefully a bit less Zoom fatigue.
Fantastic. That's wonderful. Alex, I've really, really enjoyed catching up with you. I hope you've had a good time and it's not been too painful.
Not at all. It's been a pleasure, Maria. Thank you for having me, and thank you for, thank you for giving us this platform to share all you do. I listen all the time.
Thank you. That's super. And if you have enjoyed listening to Speaking Business Podcast and this episode, please give us a rating on Apple Podcasts. Tell all your friends, share it, contribute to Mind Over Mountains charity. And until next time, I have been Maria Franzoni. Bye-bye for now.
Bye, folks.